Something good.
Okay. Hello, everybody. Welcome back, or welcome here in the first place. Metal webinars, fun stuff for us, especially when I get to hang out with Bridget. Hi, Bridge.
Hi.
The world knows Bridget. I don't need to introduce you at all. Social worker extraordinaire, counselor, psychologist extraordinaire, friend, mom, colleague. Let's see what else. Daughter, I'm sure. I know your mom. So anyway, probably sister too.
You too.
Anyway, your
Yeah.
CV is long. Um, Welcome back. It's good to be with you always. So we'll get into today's subject in a moment. Autonomy, it's a biggie. Lots to say. But as usual, kind of quick level setting. These things for those of you out there who are new to the webinars. These are meant to be really just I was going to say friendly conversations, but they don't even have to be friendly. They have to be respectful. But Bridget and I will share some thoughts and some slides. Thank you, Sonia, as ever, for the beautiful slides. And we'll sort of lay out some concepts and around the subject, and then get to the fun stuff, which is the dialogue with you all. So questions, comments, all welcome, again, within the sort of basic safety of respect, but feel free to emote here. And no pressure to say anything, but very welcome to. Um, so with that, with some details on how to do that, over to you, Sonia.
Thank you, BJ. So as
Mm.
BJ said, he and Bridget are going to go through some slides, and then there are two ways that you can chat with us after that. You can click on the raise hand button and you can speak with BJ and Bridget about your question or comment, or if you'd prefer to not do that, you can type it into the Q&A and I will read it aloud for you. The chat is also open, so please feel free to put your thoughts in there as they come up as we're discussing different things, and thank you so much for being here.
Mm. Okay. Well, maybe I'll kick us off to start here, just to lay out this one a little bit. So, one thing to know about the subject, we all come from, among other places, the healthcare world. And in healthcare, we're taught the concept of autonomy comes up in medical ethics and bioethics. And since I believe the 70s, sort of the basic tenets of bioethics, of contemporary bioethics, were laid down. And essentially, four principles that are meant to be kind of held in tension that you apply to any tricky situation in a healthcare setting. Um, so, one of those four tenets or pillars is autonomy. And in the Western healthcare system, autonomy is just like person. You as an individual have sovereignty and domain over yourself. And decisions, a lot of medical decisions are deferential. Ideally, in a sense, they're meant to be deferential to you as the patient, as the autonomous person whose life is the thing on the line. So there's autonomy, and then the other four are sort of do no harm, a phrase that gets misapplied to the Hippocratic Oath. It's actually not in the Hippocratic Oath, but do no harm is kind of obvious. Like in healthcare and medicine, in the world of caring for another person, good makes good sense. So you do not want to hurt them. Okay,
Mm.
good. A third pillar is actually beneficence, or not only don't do harm, but actively try to do well by your patient and each other. So the word for that might be beneficence, it's often said. So we have autonomy, do no harm, beneficence, and then the fourth pillar is often never really gets to the conversation, um, but maybe increasingly so in recent years, and it's high time, which is the fourth pillar being justice. So that with limited resources, there's some just attempt to apply those resources in a fair manner. So justice being the fourth pillar. So again, any decision, like if a ethics team gets consulted to talk about a tricky situation, they will invoke these four pillars, and they're meant to be held in tension and can be applied to any situation. So anyway, there's some background on bioethics as it
Mhm.
looks at autonomy. What do you
Yeah.
say, Gidge?
Oh, I say that that's that. And I think one of the reasons that I was really interested and excited to talk about autonomy is, well, when I think about those four pillars, a lot of what I think about is um, sort of North Stars or principles that help the healthcare system right size its power.
Mm, mm,
And I also think that autonomy in this context is really like an extrapolation or an extension of very American or Western orientation to individuality and
mm,
independence and soloness. And
mm,
I think one of the things that'll be interesting for us in this conversation together and with you all is really like, what is the what is the right balance of autonomy or independence or soloness in this space of illness and dying and grieving?
mm,
How do we hold space and identify and recognize, individual wants and needs and process? And then the context for which all of that is happening, which is usually in relationship to other people, relationship to other roles, relationship to community.
mm,
And so, yeah, I'm just sort of excited together to get to think together about like complicating the idea of
mhm,
autonomy while honoring the importance of patients or of us in patient experiences really being able to have our voices heard, our voices uplifted and centered, right? And
mhm.
some like tension, I think.
Yes,
Yeah.
totally, absolutely intentional. And in fairness to healthcare, which I know we have a lot to say and critique, is these are meant to be intention. Any one of these principles by themselves does not get you all the way where you need to be.
Right. Yes. And this is messy stuff. Like there aren't exactly right answers either, right? And
Mm,
many ethicists, many smart, loving, thoughtful people could come out with sort of different ideas of what is, quote, right or wrong in any scenario.
mhm.
Um, so dynamic, dynamic stuff.
Yes, very much.
Yeah. Um, But another reason that we wanted to start out just really by thinking about the Western healthcare system is because, we know we've sat in a million conversations, and probably many of you have too, where so much of the language is about, what do you want?
Mm,
What would your mom want? Right? This orientation really around individual mm, desire maybe feels like too nice of a word, but,
mm,
wanting.
mhm,
And that can feel really heavy because these are big questions that we often don't really know how to figure out by ourselves, right? It's part of the reason we
mhm,
exist as Mettle and in the roles that we occupy professionally, because like this isn't that fun of stuff to figure out by ourselves.
mm, mm.
Maybe not meant to in some pretty fundamental way.
No, I think you're right on that last point. I mean, it is none of us is in a vacuum. We are all parts of society, families, culture. I mean, they're in a way, autonomy, as in the way it's being discussed so far, doesn't really exist. And sometimes there can be an
Yeah.
unfairness put on the patient, or you know, just tell us what you want, and we'll do that. Well, they may not be in a position to say or to know what they want, and I know. I mean, one of the I'll just say, I know there's so much to get to. Like one of the questions that terrifies me the most is, "What do you want?"
Yeah, totally.
It really flummoxes me. Not never mind healthcare, just in general. You'd think it should be the most easy question in the world to answer, but because we affect one another, etc. I really struggle to answer that question per se, as
Yeah.
such, per se. Um, anyway, so yeah, it's tricky stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. What do you want is a really hard question to answer sometimes. I mean, sometimes we know,
Mhm.
but knowing isn't actually necessarily make it easy to say, right?
Mm-mm.
And
Or deal with the fallout for others, etc. Sorry to interrupt you.
right, yeah, totally. No,
Yeah.
I think that the like, what do you want? Yeah, I mean, there's so much practice. There's so much practice for all of us and so much skill building for all of us to figure out like want, want versus need. How do we articulate that? How do we feel safe sharing that? But the idea that we're asked that sort of in this vacuum, not knowing what the other person thinks, right? Like even from a provider
Mhm.
standpoint, like what do you want? And it's like, well, I don't know. What do you think?
Mhm.
Or that sort of like famous question of like, well, what would you do? Because
Mhm.
I don't know. I haven't been here before and you have all this expertise. You've seen it before. Tell me what you would do, right? And how, on the professional side of things, we're sort of instructed many times like, don't answer that question because that's
Mhm.
the offering of too much of our own subjectivity. But this is how we figure stuff out by looking around and looking at people that we respect or don't and being like, what do they do
Mhm.
and how'd they do it and what does that mean to me?
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, So autonomy in the way that it's constructed philosophically often or in practice often really kind of highlights this individualness. But that's just kind of to your point, like false.
Mhm.
If it's happening in discussion with another person, like there's other influences there. There's other like uh,
For sure. I mean, in everything, I think we maybe both believe. I think existence is a relational endeavor. I mean,
yeah,
to each other, to the world, to nature, to ourselves. And that, what is our self? The self is this constantly in flux thing and complicated, and there are multiple selves in any of us. So it's all relational. So therefore, the idea of being in a vacuum is patently and importantly inaccurate, and yet we're meant to act from that place
right,
um, that doesn't actually exist. Very
right.
problematic. And
Oh,
autonomy is often something that gets invoked as in a positive sense, like, "Hey, this is my life," and there's so much true. Yes, but autonomy as such it starts heading towards actually more towards isolation.
yeah.
uh, and that's a lonely, hard place, sad state.
Right, right, right. So in some ways, like I think our the hope or a hope for this space today and moving forward around autonomy here is just like how do we how do we get the best stuff out of the concepts of autonomy and then right size the ways in which it works to kind of separate or isolate or give us false senses of control and influence, right? Like
Mhm.
so much of like anticipatory planning of like, well, what would you want? And resuscitation, no resuscitation, this kind of intervention later on is also projection of future autonomy, which is maybe, I mean, I don't know. It's complicated.
Mhm. To the point of sometimes it's just almost silly if it weren't so consequential. Yeah.
Agreed. Agreed. Sonia, you want to go to the next slide? Yeah, so we're going to do this. We're going to talk about the things before we get to the slide to talk about the things.
Mhm.
But we wanted to frame just to continue to think about, okay, so what's the right way to hold autonomy? And this is like the thing that's so beautiful about all of our lives is that this means something slightly different for each of us. Autonomy, independence, our own voice, how we share that voice, how we identify our needs or our wants, right, is in the context of who we are, how we were raised, the people around us, or not. Um, and there's just so much nuance there under the questions of like, this is your life or your body, and what do you want?
Mhm.
Um, so there's lots of philosophical orientations to autonomy other than just the sort of Western individualistic one. And one that I think about a lot is really this idea of relational autonomy, which uh, I think probably has very, very, very old lineage, but commonly today is talked about as like a feminist principle.
Mm.
And you know, one of the ways this feels most alive for me is I remember, and BJ, I wonder what experiences you remember when you think about this, but I remember standing in an ICU and there's an older woman in the bed. She's probably like in her late 80s. I don't remember her name. But I remember her daughter and her granddaughter standing at the foot of her bed. And this kind of what felt like to me at the time kind of a panel of physicians. It was probably actually two, but sort of this panel feeling of folks asking this daughter and this granddaughter, you know, if your mom was here, what would she tell us? What would she want? And the looks on their face like is still such a visceral feeling to me because it was like there was no like we were speaking in English, there was no interpreter, but there was no translation of that idea into their bodies. As if
Mm.
she was this separate from them being that could kind of rise up and direct them and tell them what to do. Like their lives
Mm.
were so intergenerationally intertwined. They lived together, they co-cared for one another, they cared for children together, right? They had this like
Mm.
deeply intertwined daily life. And probably, although I never got to talk to them about it with any detail, this deeply intertwined sense of self, right? They were not these
Mm.
like separate autonomous beings where they could hear clearly what she would want for herself because what she would want was so bound to what was in their best
Mm.
interest also,
Mm.
right? So that question of
Mm.
like, if she was here, what would she say? Like there was no landing pad for them
Mm.
there. Right. So part of it is like, what are the better questions that we could ask? But also, you know, in case any of you here have been asked a similar question or have thought about it in that way and it doesn't work, like
Mm.
that's okay. It makes sense that framing doesn't work for all of us.
Mm.
Right?
And at best ever, it's a guess too, and it's fraught. And I
Yeah.
fear so much of what's happening often in a healthcare setting in that moment is less a kindness to evoke someone's agency who can in that moment speak for themselves, and instead starts heading more towards a kind of shirking of responsibility.
Mhm.
Well, she told us that, or you granddaughter told us to do this or that, and so
Yeah.
and I don't mean to go so dark so quickly, but I think that's often actually in the mix. And anyway, that's sort of a tangent.
Yeah.
One way and another, it can be not. These questions can be not only not helpful, but perhaps even hurtful,
Mhm.
vexing at least, and then also just placing burden of responsibility where it can't belong.
Yeah, totally. I think we do that in so many like this kind of shirking or like we try and dance around the nuance that's there either because we feel
Mhm.
like we don't have time or we don't have the skill or the
Mhm.
capacity to actually like really understand like who are these people to one another and how
Mhm.
decisions um this maybe is also a little bit tangenty but it's coming to my mind you know, I think often like caregivers or family members are will be like in hospital settings will be like thanked for being there. Like, oh, thank you for being here and caring for the, you know, I see that you're here and thank you for being here and thank you for being in this meeting, which implies choice, again,
Mhm.
sort of like autonomous choice to be there. And I think that in
Mhm.
some ways that strikes against the heart of how so many people relate, which is like, there's no thank you. Like, there's nowhere else in the world to be other than right
Mhm.
here. Right. It's kind of like this little micro infusion of that kind of, you know,
Mhm.
on this other side saying, thank you for being here. And the person's like, what are you talking about? Like, nothing
Mhm.
else exists in this moment because that person is my life. Right.
Mhm.
Right. Like,
Mhm. And there are other angles that lead you there too. Like sometimes people are there out of duty or
Yes.
obligation too. May not actually want to. I mean, so other layers to what you're pointing to. Um,
Right. Right. Yeah. I
yeah.
mean, it's so, what's one of the morals of the story? I guess like part of what I think aches or aches in me around this is like the systems we get care usually will not have the capacity to hold the nuance of our lives.
Mhm.
So if from outside we can think about it and put language to it so that we know how to best instruct or direct or inform the people who are caring for us of like, hey, um, this is how we think about family. This is how we think about decision making. This is how we lean on one another. Oh, we don't. I don't have a family that's going to be
Mhm.
here. And it would help me if you don't pick on that too much,
Mhm.
right? Like the system has to do a lot of things for a lot of people. And so how can we enter it primed
Mhm.
to help it help us in the most
Mhm.
appropriate way?
Mhm.
And can we feel entitled to or confident in finding some language that actually characterizes how we make decisions, how we relate to
Mhm.
future planning, you know,
Mhm.
like are we separate from one another?
Mhm.
Oh, I wish we were. Actually, we're not. How do we get some more okayness with that? How do we get some
Mhm.
more okayness with increasing need or
Mhm.
interdependence or dependence, right?
Mhm.
Should go to the next.
Right on.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. You just made me think of something else, but now it's gone anyway. So yeah, next slide.
So I think, and BJ, I've heard you talk about this a lot,
Mhm.
but this idea of separateness or independence, I mean, it's beautiful, like beautiful. Independence is beautiful. Like I want my children to be independent. I want to feel independent. That is important to me.
Mhm.
But I think we really overemphasize it,
Uh,
right?
for sure, I would go a little farther even to say that um, it's aspiration or directional, um, but also impossible. It's
Mm,
back to sort of in like someone who needs no one. Is that I mean that's sort of the absolute term of independence. Like that
mhm.
person has never existed. Hopefully in a way would never exist. I mean, the part of this magical wild ride we're on is how we all affect one another and are affected by each other, et cetera. So when we say independent, what I think what's much more accurate to say we're all on a spectrum of somewhere between complete dependency and total independency. And those two ends are really almost never the case. And we're always somewhere in the middle. It's just a matter of degree. And that at least helps my mind work with that concept. I too seek independence, crave independence to a
Yeah.
point.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, like it's not a real thing, that kind of total independence that I think is really pedestaled as like what we're all, maybe not we're
Yeah,
all there's so this is also culturally laden, but certainly in a lot of like dominant narrative, this idea that anything other than independence is a failure,
right.
right?
And which is becomes cruel when you realize that independence is impossible. So we're all left to feel like failures for not doing something that's impossible.
Yeah.
That starts taking on aspects of that feels mean. That's like a real setup.
Totally. And then we are so, right, like the failure or the something's wrong with me or this isn't going the way that it was supposed to go.
Mm.
Storylines get so loud and distracting and consuming that we miss like what's happening in front of us,
Mm,
which may be like our best friends showing up in a way we couldn't have ever imagined, or
mm,
an intimacy with our partner or an intimacy with our child, that our adult child or whoever, that like is totally new and maybe uncomfortable, but we can't like pay attention to it because it's just like, this isn't how it's supposed to be. This isn't how it's supposed to be.
mm, mm,
This is not what I imagined 72 would look like, right? Or 42.
mm,
So the kind of false idea of independence is distracting from what's happening and creates a lot of pain.
mm, mm,
And then we miss out on like
mm,
maybe something really beautiful in front of us, right? Or we can't, I mean, I think this overlays into something we hear about so much of like, I don't want to be a burden,
mm,
right? That being like, I mean, top note, so many people who come to us, who come to me, like, top note, I don't want to be a burden. But what's in, like, what?
mm,
Burden?
mm,
And defined by who? Because I see people who are desperate. I see people surrounding you who are desperate to care for you. Find
mm,
incredible meaning, want nothing else for that. Like,
mm,
oh, that
mm,
kind of love or that kind of care is hard to tolerate. I get that for sure.
mm, mm.
Right. But the
Yeah.
whole, I'm a burden if I'm not independent.
Mm, yep. And again, so therefore you are a burden for being alive. I mean, like like, there is no, we're all a burden. That's a way, as a negative frame of just saying we need each other. We
Yes.
need things from each other. Yeah.
Exactly. Right. And we
So
don't,
we keep.
we just do all these gnarly things in our metaphor and our storytelling, which is like, for the most
Mhm,
part, we accept that babies need us. That's okay. It's okay for babies
mhm,
and it's okay for children to be dependent. Although,
mhm,
of course, with the constant ushering of them towards independence, right? I think that's how we kind of tolerate that on some level. We
mhm,
do all this infantilizing of need over time, of like returning to babyhood or something. Like, I don't know, it's so
mhm.
painful.
And needlessly so.
Yeah,
Yep.
needlessly so.
And and I feel, and whenever I hear that, and it is a refrain so common. I mean, it's probably the number one, especially in the frame of people seeking to hasten their death with death with dignity laws, end of life options acts in California. This is the number one reason people are wanting to get off the planet before they otherwise have to. And it tells you something about it gives you a window into that person in that moment, how they're feeling. Sure. And I know that feeling. It's not a pleasant feeling, but I think what we're saying here is, that's speaking of autonomy, it's not even your feeling to own. Like, we are doing that to each other. That is a miscue of reality, a misread of reality, of the way things actually are. And so whenever I hear that statement from people, I feel for them. And it's true. It's an indictment, not of them. They're not. It's an indictment of the sort of systems we've created in the constructs of thought that we all continue to labor under.
Yeah, yeah, totally. It is not by no means, I think, are we pointing towards any like shame in that feeling. It's more, or that thought. It's more just like, wait, can we pause and maybe for a long time and check in with like, where does that come from?
Mhm.
And, maybe I think it can be so tricky because I think many people create a lot of beauty and goodness in their life through through this striving for independence, through this striving for autonomy.
Mhm.
And so again, it's not like throwing it all out, but can we interrogate like what does burden actually mean? And on what
Mhm.
level? Because there's like, I don't want to be an emotional burden. I don't want to be a financial burden, which is a really
Mhm.
big and real concern for a lot of people. So it's not to discredit any of it. It's just like, what really is the root? And if it's an
Mhm.
idea about how I'm supposed to be, is that still working?
Mhm.
Like, is that
Mhm.
helping me be as
Or
connected?
anyone?
Yes,
Yeah.
right. Like as connected as I want to be to my life, to other people, to,
Mhm.
that that which is important to me.
Mm.
And everybody gets that. I mean, everybody gets to have their own answer. If you're like, nah,
Mhm.
it is
Mhm.
me. I am what I have. Me against like
Mhm.
you can
Yep.
choose that, but can we just pause and make sure that like these things that we take on because they're in the water and then orient our lives around like that we want to continue to choose them and
Mhm.
that they're
Right
working.
on. These are not natural law. These are not laws of nature. These are
No, not the law of nature is
inventions.
the exact opposite. The law of nature,
Exactly.
we need one another.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. But so much pain by these ideas that we don't even like, I think for the most part, stop to think like, where'd this come from?
Mhm.
Right. Oh, my dad is older than him though. Right. Like
Mhm. Mhm.
this is the stuff of our society that drives towards more separation,
Mhm. Mhm.
striving, constant striving. Next slide.
Mhm.
Yeah. So we need one another. We're just going to assume we're making that assumption. We're taking that assumption with us that we need one another, that we are interdependent, even if the dependencies are different or the needs are different. Um, and yet, like we can still have solitude in that, right? Like it's again, it's like it's not that like the autonomous self or the individual self doesn't exist or isn't there or doesn't need nurturing. But how
It's
can
just
we,
not the whole story.
it's not the
Yeah.
whole story. And how can we have it in the context of this like relational reality
Mhm.
where we impact one
Mhm.
another,
Right on.
you know?
I think this comes up for me a lot towards really the end of life. There are certain, and maybe that's just a dramatic version. I think there are parts of our experiences that are they're wholly our own because it'd just be impossible to articulate or locate in another how it's affecting another person. That um, you know, I don't think any of us is actually alone, but
Mm,
that doesn't take anything away from the felt sense of being alone. If someone presents to us and loneliness, as we know, is a sort of a public health issue nowadays. It's a scourge, and
yeah.
we can't say that. Oh, well, that's just inaccurate. You're never alone. No one's ever alone. Not to discount those feelings at all. Those feelings are very real, and maybe even beyond the feeling, there are parts of our experiences that are wholly our own. I gotta start to say about death at the end of life. I mean, I think we can accompany each other very far, but there are certain steps that are just you or you and the cosmos, but are hard to share.
Yeah.
And the best we can do is your this phrase here to we can be alone together.
Mhm.
That is its own beautiful place, I think. I feel
Yeah,
that way a lot of times.
totally. We can be together alone and we can be alone together, right? And they kind of feel a little, I don't know, they can feel a little bit different.
Mhm.
Uh, oh, we can figure out. I was talking to a family yesterday, who uh, the sort of matriarch is dying and she's been married for a really, really, really long time. And just what it is when you've been like trotting down the road with one person kind of side by side for a really long time and your focus has maybe
Mhm.
been really on one another or on kids or whatever, but you've been like kind of in the same kind of proximity for decades and then there is something about one person dying and the other person not dying where like what you're looking at is very, very different. And that can
Mhm.
feel so lonely, right? I'm
Mhm.
trying to imagine or prepare for what it is to not exist in this way anymore. And I'm trying to
Mhm.
figure out how to exist without you, right? And that can feel so like,
Mhm.
oh, how do we keep our tethers to one another when we've been doing this? And now it kind of feels like
Mhm.
doing this, right? But I think that that's sort of like we can do the work to be together alone in that, which is like I can't know her experience. She can't know his and he can't know hers.
Mm,
But we can still find the ways to like keep the connection
mhm,
juiced up in
mhm,
respect to that, that there are things that like there are developmental,
mhm,
spiritual or philosophical processes that we go through that are separating in some ways, on separating on some
mhm,
element, connecting on another.
mhm.
Yeah.
Well, and as your point, I mean, even the separateness can be a connection, like the the aloneness, the together aloneness, that each of us with different details is in our own version of that, and that's its own kind of connection. So this also reminded me too of of the problematic nature of language, and all these words were they're sort of directional or
Yeah.
something like that. I mean, it's very hard to find a word for what we're describing
Yeah.
without tipping too far. Like, there is such a thing as there are differences between you and me, Bridget. We are two different people. That is, yes, of course. And we affect each other through mirror neurons. We're reaching into each other all the time. I mean, but you can't just, I think where maybe one of the things that's a sort of meta message here is you can't just stay with you're you, I'm me. That's it. Nor can you say there's no difference between us. We're just completely porous, no boundaries whatsoever. That either of those extremes, like dependence and independence, aren't neither is a real state. But together is this sort of mysterious mix of what it means to be alive. And language is going to get us only part of the way there.
Totally.
But anyway.
Totally. Yeah. I guess I'm thinking back, I'm thinking about this couple a little bit more too, because there's this in some ways, right? Like, okay, so we don't want to be burdens. Often that is, I mean, I'm not saying I don't want to be a burden. We have this concept of we don't want to be a burden. And
Mhm,
often that comes down to like care needs, right?
mhm,
Like it's hard for me to tolerate thinking about you bathing me. It's hard for me to tolerate thinking about you helping me go to the bathroom, right? Or I can't tolerate it. Um, if I can't do those things for myself, I don't feel like an integritous person anymore. But when I think about this couple and I think about the ways in which what they're looking at and feeling in their bodies is in some ways very, very different. And in some moments, really hard to connect across. It's actually the acts of care that provide
mhm,
for these moments of connection, like inarguable connection,
mhm,
right?
mhm,
It's like actual, just like the inarguable bodiliness of these times
mhm,
and of these transitions. And I'm not saying that I think without work, that should just be like tolerable and feel good, but I think
mhm,
could. I think if
mhm,
we work to unpack these ideas that there's something wrong with needing help, then when we are facing something that developmentally is sort of, we have to figure it out in ourselves or with our God or with our spirituality or
mhm,
whatever, that it is exactly the act of somebody else touching us in a safe and kind way and helping with us with somebody that tethers us back to
mhm,
that gives us that connection that is inarguably what we need.
mhm. And by the way, it may still not feel good or comfortable, but I think you and I might agree that there's way more to life than comfort or feeling good. And it's very important and
Yeah.
powerful and potent part of being alive.
Yeah.
Um,
And can we like, yeah, no, it's not necessarily, maybe it never feels good, but it's happening. Because so could we
yeah.
like, can we interrupt the thoughts that say like, I just have to do this, or I have to tolerate it, or I have no choice, and be
Mhm,
like, can I be curious about what this is like? Can I pay more attention?
mhm,
Can I pay more attention to just what it's like to be here and do this, or to give in this way or receive in this way?
mhm.
And maybe it never feels good, but maybe we learn something new, feel something different other than just
Yeah.
the thought in our head, like that's like bad, 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 don't like, don't like, don't like.
Yeah. And to your point earlier of interrogating that feeling a little bit, because how much of that is actually endemic to us versus this received sort of constructed thing
Yeah,
about we're failing because we need someone. I would hazard a guess that the bulk of what goes into this not feeling good is that because
totally.
it's a mark of something. You're a fail, you're a problem, there's something wrong with you. And
Right.
so this is why to belabor the source of
Yeah.
these feelings is really critical. And I think, another thing, it's come up in conversations together again, like, I think also what ends up happening with these notions that we struggle under is one of the fallouts is most of us are pretty crappy at receiving care. So many, it's a huge note in healthcare. Oftentimes, people who are providers or clinicians are pretty shitty patients, like because they see the sort of one-way street of care, giving it, um, but taking it in is actually really weirdly hard. Um, anyway, sort of a tangent-ish,
Yeah.
but sort of just trying to get underneath these feelings. Why is it uncomfortable? I
Yeah.
think there's some reasons.
I mean, what do you think some of the reasons are? What are the top ones that come to your mind about like why it's so hard to receive care or love or
Well,
tender?
I think we've named it as a top line because it implies a failing. There's something where that's something we're not because we need something that I'm not independent or that's or so and then so it either lends itself to a sort of a feeling of inadequacy or there's something you are incomplete or something wrong with you. All the things we talked about. Um, I think that's probably my top 10 reasons. Um,
Yeah.
yeah. How about you, Gage? Are there other things on that list? Besides also not being very practiced at it for many of us.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I mean, I think no, I mean, I think it kind of all comes back to this kind of root of like there's something wrong with me if I need something, right? A need that's not negotiable.
Mhm.
Uh,
Yeah.
uh, and that there's something wrong with me. Right. And I think those ideas are so contagious. Like, I mean, they're just kind of everywhere, but it's like they're so sticky. And, our brains, like those routes in our brains can be like quite grooved. And so it's just like
Mhm.
bad. And then we're like just over and over and over again soaking our brains and therefore our nervous systems the idea of like not okay, not okay, not okay, not okay, not okay, not okay.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, Mama. How we doing on time? Whoa, sheesh.
I know. We should
That
hear for some people.
would, yeah, guys.
No,
Yes.
no how
Uh,
no how
uh,
in the chat. Maybe the feeling of being a burden is an expression of grief. Totally.
mhm. Yeah, it's a good
Like,
line. Uh-huh.
yeah.
Yeah.
So let's see if we can get there, right? When we think, oh, I'm a burden, or oh, dad keeps saying like I'm never going to be a burden. I won't be a burden. It's like, yeah, what's one layer, two layers, 10 layers under that?
Mhm.
The fear or the sadness of, I love doing things for myself. I love working in my garden. I
Mhm.
love it's so satisfying to take my trash out. Like, I don't like watching somebody else do that.
Mhm. Yeah, I like that. That's a great note, Noha. I think that explains a lot for people, and it also gets at something else that in modern society we haven't been so good at, or certainly not encouraged to do, which is grieve. So it comes out in these funny proxies.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. Right. Yeah.
Are there questions out there, guys?
Yeah. What do you think? What do you,
Yeah, more slides, jeez. But yeah, any questions though, in the interest of
yeah,
time.
questions or thoughts or pushback or
Mhm.
By text, by voice.
I'm gonna stop sharing just so we can see our lovely faces. No questions, or let's see if we got hands up.
Mm.
Nothing yet.
Or was there something to say while we give
Yeah, do
the
you want
folks
anything
out
on
there
that?
some space? On
The
that last
practical
slide, the practical
applications?
applications, no,
Yeah.
good.
Yeah. I had a fantasy I was gonna like actually bullet those in my mind so that they were concrete things I could say, but I didn't do it.
Oh, Sarah, 1 second.
Yeah.
Sarah, you'll probably have to unmute yourself on your end, but you're set to go on this end.
Ah, okay.
Hi.
Hi. What came to mind was the different ways of defining resilience. Like some people define it as it's just an individual thing. You know, somebody has all the things they need to be resilient. And otherwise, it's not all the individual, it's interdependence. It's got to come from the environment also. It can't just be the person. And it reminds me when my son was in med school and he was stressed to the max like everybody else.
Yeah.
And the administration heard that they were all stressed out. And so they made a mandatory day of learning stress management on their day off,
Mhm.
which planned very well, needless to say.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So, but
The systems love resiliency as an antidote to untenable conditions. And that's,
right.
you know,
Yeah.
I think, probably autonomous resilience, right? That's a first too.
Mhm.
Like
Mhm.
we can't source all of the things we need to manage by ourselves.
No, we can't.
No, it's like
Mm-mm.
this the lie of self-made
Right.
anybody, anything. And
Right.
you're I'm sorry, Sarah. What were you
That's
say?
okay. Self-sufficiency. I think
Mm.
that's part of the myth is that we're supposed to be self-sufficient.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And
Mhm.
that's what you mean by there's something wrong with us if we need something.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I would say, if we were to, maybe if the bunch of us here were going to redefine what constitutes resiliency, high on the list might be your ability to source and receive the care you need.
Right. Right.
Um,
Yeah, definitely.
Mhm. Yeah, I'm just thinking even BJ about what you were talking about earlier with like how hard or how uncomfortable, frustrating, many things, the question of like what do you need is.
what do you want?
What do you want? Like,
Yeah.
Mhm.
yeah, like just the idea that we're supposed to be able to figure that out by ourselves on some level. I
Mhm.
feel like we spend so much time talking to people just trying, like a lot of time trying to articulate wants and needs. And like we need one another. We need to hear ourselves say the things out loud. We need to hear how
Right.
somebody else reframes that back to us to be like, oh no, that's it.
Mhm.
Right.
I thought it was this, but actually something about the way you said it on this day and time, you know,
Mhm.
helps me understand it's actually like this other thing.
Mhm.
I'm a
Mhm.
retired hospice social worker, and one of the
Mhm.
difficulties I had with what do you want is that a lot of times people don't have the information.
Yeah.
Mhm. Did we lose you, Sarah? You there?
Well,
Oh, we may have lost your voice.
yeah, not muted. But
Mm.
I think that's a a huge barrier to knowing what it is that you want, which is
Mhm.
like you don't have the information, you don't understand the information, you can't integrate the information, right?
Mhm.
There's a lot of barriers to making sense of, in some cognitive way, what's happening to then respond to it with a clear directive.
Mhm.
Um, maybe what you're, oh, now Sarah's gone, but maybe what Sarah's pointing to more explicitly is really just that like patients don't get the information that they need or want. And that's certainly a common experience.
Mhm.
We can all work, we can work as consumers of the healthcare system. We can go in and say, I want X, Y, and Z information. But
Mhm.
to go full circle, sometimes we need help figuring out how to articulate that or that it's okay to.
Mhm.
And we got to talk to somebody else about that or hear somebody else say, like, yeah,
Mhm.
you got to go in and say, I want you to be really straightforward with me about what's happening.
Mhm.
So that then with my family or then with my friend or then with my spiritual advisor, I can make sense of and try and make some decisions.
Jennifer did have a note in the chat that I wanted to read. So, if we know that autonomy is not natural and interdependence is essential, what do we do in a medical system or the constructs of a bustling city that are still pushing on, quote, do it on your own?
Mhm. Well, let's see here. What do you do in that moment? I mean, there's a couple of things leap to mind as a starter. I mean, but I think this could be a really rich conversation. I mean, one is, like, you know,
Yeah. Yeah.
like because we are armed with if you're paying attention, we know what we just said is true. Like, quit foisting your made up crap at me. So that'd be one response. It'd be a little subversive, but that may not get you to what you need. Um, I mean, there's certainly sort of pushback in a more respectful way and re I see your follow-up note there, Jennifer. I am very good at that too. But of course, you can push back on it. There's a real dialogue to be had. Um, you know, and sort of have something of a conversation like we're having here. Um, I think this is why it's a wonder. I love when patients ask physicians what you referenced earlier, Gidge. Never mind, just clinicians. Like, I don't know, what would you do? It's a really assertive question, and it's fascinating to watch how some clinicians will completely resist it, and it feels so cowardly to me. But it's still, I think, a very valuable question and tells you more about the person who's answering it.
Yeah. I
Let's
think,
see what else.
I
Yeah.
guess what I'm thinking is like, and maybe this won't be a totally satisfying answer, but I do think it's really interesting. Like when we change our own minds, right? And we're like, independence is fake.
Mhm.
Interdependence is what is real. Needing one another is what is real, right? Whatever the right languages or words are for each of us to kind of reorient and reframe this world of things. And we really like buy into it and we continuously reorient ourselves to that sort of new notion. Like, how does the world kind of change on its own? So if I go into the healthcare system and I know that I don't believe, or I know what I believe in, right? Or I know philosophically what's orienting me, and I feel I'm working to build confidence around that, then the system kind of changes, right? Or I can direct it differently because when somebody comes back to me with a what you want question, I can say, like, that question doesn't really work for me.
Mhm.
Or we can, if we're not sort of confrontational, if that feels
Mhm.
confrontational to us, we can just like let it go because it's like, oh, that doesn't, I'm not going to pick that up. Here's my
Mhm.
question. Here's how you can help me. Right. So just the experiment of like, what if there wasn't a thing as being a burden? And just the
Mhm.
like the imaginative process of like how the world changes if that's not fact.
Mhm. Noha, as often, has such a nice response. Do your research, ask questions, advocate, regulate yourself before speaking, and find a supportive tribe. That's a beautiful answer, Noha.
Yeah, maybe we could
Amen.
add to that list of like if we know we're going to go into a setting that's really gonna challenge our orientation or our equilibrium, that we plan out some recuperation, right?
Mhm.
Keep like
Mhm.
we move so fast sometimes, and then we get really scrambled, and reasonably
Mhm.
so. We get really scrambled by a certain interaction and we kind of lose our center. But if we know we're going to
Mhm.
go into a system that's going to challenge our center, or to a busy city street that's going to challenge our center, can we, in the transition out or on the other side, just take a second to come back to what feels more
Mhm.
to us or more like home?
Right on.
Yeah. It's 12. We did it.
What?
We talked for an hour.
Oh, sheesh. Huh. Okay.
Um, Thank you all for being
Ah.
here. Hopefully, just the start of a conversation. Always happy to talk with any of you more about.
Mhm.
Nice to be with you, BJ.
Always, Gidge. I love you very much. Thank you. It was wonderful to be with you.
Yeah. Have a
And
good
you too, sons, and everyone else out there.
Same,
But
same. Wishing everyone a
I,
wonderful weekend. Thank you both.
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Till next time.
Talk to you soon.
Bye,
Bye.
guys.
Bye.